They always said the LCC and GLC was the best club in London, the best architectural club. Oh, is there a date? I've got my glasses.
Oh, here we are, March 59.
But it was the first scheme I got when I joined. I can't remember the circumstances. I don't think there was many great decisions to make. I think possibly it sort of more or less designed itself.
Yes.
I was born in Yorkshire in 1927. My father was on a local Bradford paper, and then he got a job on the Times in London, and finally we landed up in Sevenoaks, where I went to school. From school I went into the Navy for 2.5, 3 years, and when I came out I was living at home, and my father said, you know, you can't live here anymore, you'll have to get out on your own. So he went to the Citizens Advice Bureau and he said, I have this boy at home and I want to get rid of him. So they said, can he do anything? I think my father probably had to think a while, and he said he draws a bit. So they said, why doesn't he become an architect? He could train and he can get a grant. So my father came home and he said, you're going to be an architect. I went to the LCC as it was. They took me on. It was a huge place, the architects department. There were 600 qualified architects.
I know, I don't think anywhere else.
I think it was the largest office in the world, actually.
Yes.
I think at one time,
Yes.
I think it
Yes.
was.
Yes.
Quite amazing.
Yes.
And there was some wonderful work went on there. And one could just wander around
Yes.
and talk to the various architects. And when I arrived, to my delight, they put me in with Colin Lucas, who I'd always, of course, you know, through my student years, revered. So it never occurred to me that I might possibly work with him. And I got a job straight away, and 2 technical assistants, Martin Richardson, and the other one was Tange. They were technical assistants, and I was grade 3. And anyway, they very much resented that, and they thought I was rubbish, you know. Anyway, we built this first place in the East End, Kilner Street, and they weren't quite so dismissive of me at the end of that. And then suddenly Colin landed me with something called Brandrum's Works.
Oh, no.
Now this is the first scheme I did for Canada Estate. It was called Brandrum's Works Site.
Brandrum's Works Site. And this is in 1959.
Yes.
Right, so this is the first.
This was the first scheme I did.
Is this the one where the quantity surveyors came along and said it's too expensive?
Oh yes, they always did that.
Did that.
Lloyd Wright was my great hero. Saw Johnson's Wax and the Talliers in East, Roby House, all those.
Yes.
Really wonderful. I go much more for the organic people. You draw it and then you draw it again and then you draw it again. And you refine a building as you go along. Proportions and things appear as you draw it until you're happy with it. This pyramidical one went to the quantity surveyor, as most of my schemes did, and came back with a black mark.
So did they step back in
They
sections?
stepped back, yes. And there were roof terraces, which is why I suppose they were too expensive. Well, I was sort of, it was my early days from my point of view, and I hadn't really got into realising how you made things cheap.
Yes.
Which was, you know, generally terraces at cheapest.
Yes.
So I really was breaking away from
that.
Yes. I used to get several tries at things. Colin never said anything about this. He never interfered with anything I did. I hardly ever saw him. Well, I remember we were having a team discussion once, and somebody said, why did we put all the 2 beds flat on one floor? From then, everybody said, yes, what a good idea. And that's how it happened. I can't remember who made the suggestion, but it was when we were talking as a team, and Colin was there. If it seems like a good idea, they say, why not do it? Let's do it. We had to put up 3 Canada estates. Colin got the brief for these other sites, and we were told by the housing architect to repeat the scheme, or repeat the types, the house types, and which took up many years afterwards. One in Battersea. Martin had a hand in this. What he did was he did the layout, really, and then claimed the scheme was his, which I think was a bit tough. If we could do it in those days, why can't we do it now? How are they going to produce 300,000 dwellings a year? Anybody could tell them how to put the housing situation right. And they must know this, and they don't do it. I mean, they can't expect developers to produce social housing. Why the government can't see this and say it? Well, of course they daren't, because it's not in Conservative policy. I mean, it's pathetic, really.
I was briefly on vacation work in LCC, Architects Department, in 1960, the end of my 4th year. And Martin Richardson sort of took me under his wing to show me what he regarded as the most interesting housing schemes then ongoing in the department, and he took me along to meet Phillip, who was then working on this step-back pyramidal scheme, which the QS, we now know, put the kibosh on. But I thought that was absolutely thrilling. And Philip's description of the LCC Architects Department as the best architects club in London, I would rather describe it as my impression was a sort of architects academy where there was experimentation and free discussion and trying out different options in a very courageous way going on all over the place. To a much greater extent than was happening in my course in Edinburgh, I must say. And so I thought it was all just fantastically interesting and freewheeling. And the fact that you said Colin Lucas actually expected them to try out numerous different options. How often does that happen these days in an architect's office where, you know, given your budget and your time scale and your brief, and you just expect to bang it out as quickly as possible. Certainly that was later what was expected in local government. So I think tonight we're looking back retrospectively at an age of optimism and generosity, which has temporarily, I hope, vanished from our horizons. And it's important to remind ourselves that this is not inevitable, that what we're suffering from is a sort of psychotic breakdown where human values are just being squeezed out, and this our rulers are rewarding the bandits and the mafia and ignoring their responsibilities to improve the lot of humanity in general, which I think is what most architects join the profession to do.
Yeah, well, fine.
Right, that's the self-portrait that you saw in the 60s. And this is a more recent picture of anyway. So that's him in his house at the moment. I've got a bit of text here which repeats more or less some of what you've seen him talk about. We've got these 72 drawings that we've gone through, and over quite a long period, and I'll nip out through this quite quick. There are some things that came out of what he was saying about Colin Lucas. I mean, he was in Colin Lucas's group, and so was John Partridge. And apparently John Partridge was grade 3, whereas Phillip wasn't quite grade 3 or something. They were slightly different. But the other people who worked with him, you mentioned Martin Richardson and Roy Stout and Tom Kay and Kit Alsop, who's a name I know. The first three one knows as, I think many of us in the room will know as architects and can probably say something about them. And Peter Aldington, who was probably the most famous of that lot. And John Robertson. John Robertson went on to be a county architect in the north of England. What didn't come out in what he just said there was we said how did they work, and he said, oh, Colin Lucas had a tin box. I was inside the tin box, and everybody else was out running around in the big open plan office in front. And a couple of things about it mentioned Royce and Cedars Road, which is a really interesting low-rise housing scheme near Clapham that we were all to go and look at. From the drawings that we got information about 7 really areas in which he worked. Kilner Street was the one you saw at the beginning, 4-storey masonettes that he did. You then saw lots of shots of the Canada estate in Bermondsey, also known as Brandon's Works, the 2 towers and the lower blocks. Handley Street, which is a repeat, really, but in Battersea. He did a competition entry for the Lillington Street competition, which we're not looking at tonight. He then worked on what's called the Kidbrooke depot site, which turned into Ferrier's estate, which got built to somebody else's designs and has since been demolished. And then he worked in the team on Thamesmead while it was going. Sorry about the spelling of Woolwich. And he ended up in the expanded town section. We're going to talk about the 2 and 3, and we're going to talk about 5 and 6, but not the other ones. And not to go on too long. This is. I'll go through this phase. Not really repeat it. Basically, what he and Martin Richardson got was basically standard plans, wasn't it? 4-storey masonette standard plans, and they clearly had fun doing the elevations, and they had fun doing the access way, the staircases, and how you put a refuse chute and the water tanks and things together. And you'll see this coming through in the later schemes. They really refined it down to what I think are quite beautiful ways of doing a very simple task. Now, I want to tell a little bit about Frank Lloyd Wright, because he mentioned his attachment to Frank Lloyd Wright, and because Frank Lloyd Wright was famous for developing what was called pinwheel plans. I won't go on too long about this, but it's worth, some of you may know all this stuff, but for those who don't, it's worth pointing out. When he was doing his Oak Park houses, he started out with a traditional American house. You had a brick fireplace bang in the middle, and then he slowly put the rooms around and spread them out. And he started out by doing sort of cruciform type plans. But then he went on and developed what are pinwheel ones, where you're non-symmetrical and you have an asymmetrical entrance. And there on the left, that's a diagram of his own house, actually, where you can see the volumes of the spaces have slid away from being a cross into being the pivot of the fireplace in the middle and the spaces radiating around. So you get, in terms of the spaces, a circular movement when you're moving through the houses. And that was something that he developed a lot. That's a real house, not quite there. That's cross, right? That's a cross cruciform plan, just so you can see what the real rooms are like. And I'll go on a bit. This is the Darwin Martin house, which is a very complicated one of these. It has cruciform bits in it, but it really has the most dramatic use of pinwheeling. Clearly, Phillip Bottomley, he definitely said he went to Johnson's Wax, and if he went to Johnson's Wax, he would have seen Johnson's house, which is the most pinwheely of all pinwheels. I throw this in, because this is, again in Oak Park, Frank Lloyd Wright, the only grouped housing scheme he got was this thing for Roberts, where Roberts owned a whole plot like this, which initially Frank Lloyd Wright dreamed the conventional thing of the 2 rows of houses, but being Frank Lloyd Wright, he said, hey, look, if you do it this way, and this way being it's divided into square plots with pinwheel plan houses rotating round one block, so that you've got asymmetry and movement through not only in the houses but between the houses themselves. And he went on, that's a blow up of one of the blocks. What he also did then, he pushed the four houses along the line, you see the diagonal lines there, he moved them in and out so that you've got asymmetrical pinwheeling spaces outside as well as inside. And to finish off all that, that's the Johnson house in Racine, which you can see the fireplace in the middle and the radiating pinwheeling spaces whizzing off. He went on, later on, the diagonals came right together, and in the late 1930s he put them together. Pinwheeling houses joined together in a pinwheeling spinning thing. And that sort of thing looked like that. That's what they looked like. Now, if we come back to Phillip Bottomley and his Canada Walk Brandon Works scheme, it consisted of the two very tall blocks like that, and then lower blocks. And actually what you're looking at elevations there, a photo and a drawing of his that he did. You can see that the elevation is asymmetrical in that on the right-hand side the bays protrude forward, and on the left-hand side you see a recessing bay, which is in fact the side of the same plan turned 90 degrees. Don't worry if you don't understand that. I'm going to show you a plan where it's a lot easier. And they look like that. We'll come to the gaps, the vertical gaps in a minute, but there on the plan you can see the two tower blocks. You can see there that it's a pinwheel plan with four flats turning out around the main block. And on the low blocks, what you get is you get a separated out staircase, and you get, again, three blocks served. The idea of pinwheeling is he's taken it on and he's applied it both to, we'll come to the internal plan. That's right, this is the AJ version of the internal plan of the tower blocks that you get on this scheme. So you can see there that it's not a fireplace in the middle, it's the access in the middle. You come up and you get the same plan. These are two bed plans turned 90 degrees to each other so that they slide past each other. So you get the form on the outside. But what you also get is, in terms of light and aspect, you get, actually you can see in you get three different aspects in each flat. I mean, obviously some are better than others, but if you look at on the left-hand plan, you'll see its living room. It's got a column in the middle of the room. At the end, the kitchen has a tiny slit window, and it repeats as they go round. The reason for the column in the middle is that if you go on every fourth bay, you get what he got the one bed flats, all right? They're pinwheeling the same way, but they're not quite so protruding, and you can see in the thin lines where the two bedroom ones are sticking out around on each side. What you don't see there that you do get is that for the lift shafts where they're cast, you get rounded corners. They're quite small, but they're quite tight circulation bases, but they're all rounded on the corners going up. This is the scheme as built. The ground floor was made higher, so you come off it and you have a ramp and to adjust the levels of the site, which looks like that. And look like that. These are all original photos. Now, that's the scheme as built. I'm going to go backwards now. I'm going to go backwards through the design process. You know when he was talking about quantity surveyors, and this is back in 59, whereas it was built in 62, 63. So there was quite a long period of going through it. One of the things that John Partridge said when Judy and I spoke with him was at Roehampton, that the Halkillick lovely concrete unités and towers were all quite expensive. In order to subsidize and get the damn thing built, the low red brick, very simple maisonette blocks that are now under big threat were done cheaply in order to keep the costs fitting together properly. This is me talking about pinwheel again. I've said it to you, so that's it in writing. Yes, we're going to talk about the low blocks, because this is his early scheme, first scheme for it, which you saw him looking at. And there you can see that the tower blocks are much the same. They're solved, they're done. There's a solution for them. But the lower ones, they spread out quite a bit. And you can see that they almost join together in some places, in others they don't, so that you get these sliding spaces in between them, that you get these roots that come from the main, where you get into the site actually, where you spread diagonally through spaces with these repeated pinwheels across the site and into the corner. And just to quickly, don't take too much time on this. There's the plan of what goes on inside these things. On the ground level, they're very wide, they're very expensive. Poor chap. No wonder they got cut. Then as you go up, they step back, right? And where you can see the white, you get terraces outside, and you get turns, and you get quite a variety of actual in-between space right in with the blocks. I mean, they do break down. That was the rough model we saw of how that was all put together, and we've seen this picture before. That's one of the terraces you got right from these little pyramidical plans that weren't built, but it's a lovely drawing of a lovely idea. And you can see there that close up, they spent a lot of time, rather like the sort of thing that Stirling and Gowan were doing at the same time. After Ham, they did some odd houses where what you could do with asymmetry, they didn't use pinwheels, but a pinwheel plus asymmetry within it. That's what got built, all right? So the pinwheels got simplified into 4 story maisonettes, 3 bays each in each block, but the stairs are in the middle and they rotate about them, but not quite so dramatically. These are the smart models. There you can see that it's a lot simpler, so the spaces in between become simpler, but you do get more of a variety of large and small, and we'll see in the other scheme we get some very interesting spaces happen. Originally, like this with the gardens and the paths and the planting that was, the as-built plans, so you see basically simple maisonette plans like the first scheme, so I think the QS was happy with those when it did, it got built. This is in Battersea. The repeat scheme. The Thames is up on the top left-hand corner. Here you can see the two tower blocks, and again the pinwheel lower blocks of a more conventional nature, not spreading out like the rather nice early ones. On this one, they tried the tower blocks in different positions, foreshadowing and views from the Thames. Spent quite a bit of time doing that, and you can see here that the spaces. That there are routes through of ways in that are widened out. This is his layout drawing. This drawing, when we were interviewing him, he stopped on this drawing and he was almost absorbed into it when we were talking to him, because it has in it quite a number of elements. You saw him opening this nice drawing that is now in the V&A drawings collection. This is blowing that up a bit. Now, there's a model there, which is this squashed pyramidal thing, which was to be a play space, and it wasn't built. And it wasn't built because Phillip Bottomley decided it shouldn't be built. But it shows the eventual. There you can see what happens with the raised side, with the concrete sides. As you move through the space between the bigger blocks, you can sort of sit on the edges of that, and you can see that the grass does very well. And dogs have to have their owners with them most of the time. Anyway, he put a lot of work into it's his initials on this drawing. It's a play space where you go up and up and up a ramp, and then there are tunnels under it as well. Ramps and tunnels. And he decided, no, you couldn't, it was too dangerous. Too dangerous. They wouldn't do it, but it would have been a beautiful thing. Going up, there's the blocks there. So the colours are different from the Canada one. You get in other space, in the tighter part on the other side, you get these other rather fun pieces of landscaping. What the local authority here, which is Wandsworth, I think, have done actually is the low blocks are built in sand lime bricks, sort of cold board sand lime bricks, rather dirty grey. They've come along and painted them a sort of dark brown colour, which I suppose as an architect, why do it? But actually, it's not bad. Well, I didn't think it was bad. You can remember. But there again, you can see how these open spaces between the pinwheel box sort of setback that you get, that they're very, very sweeping and determinate. And this is how those things look now. They've been painted. The grey sand lime bricks have been painted this dirty dark colour. That's looking at that a bit closer still, so you can see what is so really good about this is the way you get in and out. But you have these very tight, quite small staircases, only concrete, and they're incredibly simple, and they're very open, and easy to use, easy to keep clean. That's a view from further up looking down, so you can see there the pinwheel thing, right? The shape, the white bit of the staircases, the balconies. Here you get actually two joined together, so you can trot two ways along the balcony in the middle, with a kink in the middle of it. Closer up, I mean, the services get all over these rather nice. That's just a staircase landing in the middle with a chute and a hopper. That's a hopper. You can see how clean it is, and it smells nice. And as you go up and down the stairs, the tops of the stairs have these things that just about keep the rain off you, and that's a view of how the car parking is in a sort of small space. It's all very easy and relaxed, things that most people make an awful mess of. There again, there's the staircases again. You can see how sort of airy and light that sort of staircase is. And again, right, so that's the end of that section.
I remember doing some of the big layouts at home, and it was much easier to work at home. I did that at home. I remember hatching the...
Yes.
What Martin and I had always tried to do was develop a system which was much more interchangeable. When I got later on this Kidbrooke estate, I was trying to develop the same thing. Well, I think there's a photo of the model here.
Yeah.
That was a...
Because this is quite high, isn't it? Look,
Yeah, well,
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 stories.
Yes, but the smaller dwellings
Go
are
on
in
top.
there with a lift.
Yeah, yes,
All the other ones are houses or 4 stories.
yes,
It's trying to get with repetitions
Yes.
some sort of economy.
yes.
But I wanted to get as many houses on the scheme as possible.
This looks like it's a frame construction. This is
Well,
structural?
it was based on a 12-foot square frame. The idea generally was that they could have been, if need be, prefabricated
Yes.
in some way.
In some way, right. And not be too prescriptive about that, so you left yourself open to contractors' knowledge or...
Well, that sort of thing.
Yes.
I mean, at this stage, one hadn't... one was still talking in principle.
Yes, okay,
Already,
yes.
of course, you didn't know who you would get landed with.
No, quite,
In
no.
those days, of course, they were encouraging system building.
Yes, they were. By 63 they would have been, yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
heavily.
Heavily, yes.
And so one tried to persuade, develop schemes which were susceptible to system building in
Yes.
some way. I had to decide which of these types to use.
Yes.
And because Colin didn't seem to know what I was doing, when we got the quantity surveyor's report, and it was too expensive, anything was too expensive.
Anything.
I got told off by the powers that be and threatened with dismissal.
Oh my goodness, yes.
Unless something was done.
Yes.
I then had an illness brought on by
Yes.
the work.
Stress. Yes.
In
Yes.
fact, my eyesight went.
Did it?
So I
Oh,
wasn't
gosh,
able to work on
No.
the cheaper scheme,
No.
which was put up
Right. Okay.
using the plans,
Yes.
but in a different and more economic way.
Way.
And by the time I got back, it had virtually been drawn out.
Drawn up. Right.
Where was Colin Lucas in all of this?
No, he didn't enter into it.
He kept.
He kept
Out of it. Yes.
and I just had to face the
Yeah.
music.
Yes.
But I expected that in many
Well,
ways.
quite
I
honestly-
didn't want poor Colin to suffer from my mistake.
No.
One thing I want to say is actually, I'm going to follow up the Frank Lloyd Wright thing, and to do with the practice of architecture, Frank Lloyd Wright nearly always did houses again and again and again, and he did over 800 of them. So he was dealing with the same type of process and product and developed through it. That also happened in offices like this, like the LCC, where you did one scheme, then you can go on to another. Clearly, Phillip had demonstrated with the little money he did at the start that he could get a job done, which is why he got the tower blocks and the other ones to do. And on this one, clearly, he went off doing his thing, and he got into trouble for doing it, which is, I'm going to go through what he did, because what's interesting about what he did is what he did afterwards, which I hope will come clear. That's the scheme he showed you. You can see there is a large site, and you can see that he's doing these parallel terraces of different lengths. They're almost all on the same sort of direction, but some go at right angles. But there are little bits. There's a children's home as part of this, and I'm not sure there was. No, I think it's just a children's home, not other sorts of buildings. Yes, the thing of this of going and studying what you could do with housing and what dimensions you should use was preoccupied lots of people, actually. I mean, it's more famously preoccupied by, in the fourth paragraph down there, the Colin Wilson and Alan Cahoon's Bentham Road. They struggled with a sort of corb unite, and could it be 12 foot, or should it be 12 foot 4 or 11 foot 8 or something? And they worried about that. So did the Roehampton group. They worried about getting things down even to 11 foot. And Goldfinger didn't deal in feet, he dealt in inches. So he liked to do things in multiples of 11 inches, not quite a foot. So there was always a preoccupation about what multiples of things you used when you were dealing with housing, which is actually increments of rooms and increments of houses or flats. What you got with the scheme was that the emphasis on car parking was coming in, that you had to have a very high proportion of cars to the number of units there, because you thought that car ownership was going to go up. And that affected the way you thought about doing plans of things at high densities. Instead of the earlier schemes you saw there, they were broken down into different sized blocks. That if you were trying to rationalise things, you had to deal with the car. And you can see in here that there's a constant 12-foot width, and then there's varying length. As you get bigger dwellings, they expand out. And the core part stays the same, where you can see the staircases are. They stay sort of in the same position. In this thing, a lot of people got hooked on the idea of half levels at this time. And so half levels meant that you could, the staircases could be pulled into the spaces of the rooms as well, and you didn't necessarily always have to have little landings. You had landings sometimes to do with means of escape in case of fire and stuff. But so he spent this time thinking of how you did that, and he showed this lovely model which has got houses. What you see in this is you can see that there's quite tall blocks in the same plane as each other, and one at right angles. And what you can see is that at first floor level, you've got these little sort of bridges. What's happening there is that the cars are slotting in underneath. There are road layouts that come along and you slide in, so that you lose, on your narrow frontage thingy, you've got gardens on one side and you've got car parking on the other. And that causes certain other things to happen. And he's just stacking them up, how you could put them together and get various combinations. So you get a great variety of sizes. But you can see at the bottom, the ground, you get garage in on one side and gardens out on the other side. So what happens between the terraces? That's that a bit bigger, so you can see a bit more what's going on.
What's the frontage now?
12 foot.
There are 2 rooms, it must be.
Oh, the thick wall, between the thick walls is 12 foot. Now, some of them have got bigger, you're quite right, James. They did grow, but other interesting things happen. So that's putting them together, and what happens, that you have a lower one with a garage under it so that you can use the lower spaces on the next terrace along. But there, some of the accesses come up to sort of 2 or 3 stories above. This is his basic one that we were looking at, where you can see the cars on one side and the staircase. Those are all 12, all right? And he's got columns. Then started thinking, why be stuck with or rather having these party walls that run in this rigid sort of pattern was rather limiting. So he started branching off and not using the same types. That you could have a variety of spaces going in. And he got right away from his they got wider for bigger ones, and you could do, this is because he's suddenly thinking of a 12-foot square grid and expanding these things into that sort of space. I mean, a lot of people were doing this at about this time, but he clearly spent a year or so doing it, and he got quite a variety, quite a vocabulary built up of how you put together various sized units. Going on. So you've got terraces on higher ones, and then if you went and had smaller ones, you could have smaller ones where you left the ground floor completely open, and you could have staircases up and slide them around, because you could do that with the windows and things, and they were becoming more sort of poddy. And he clearly did this layout for the estate like that, which came a cropper, and he had to take his time off. As well as that, you can see in between, in quite large spaces, there are smaller buildings going on, some of which are the ones I just showed you of the little single ones building up in a sort of complicated pattern, and others where he did a children's home, which is staggered in this way. It's nothing like the scale of Van Eyck, but it breaking the things down into units. No system at all. I mean, quite free. I don't think that got built, but there's a rather nice drawing of it. Yes, it's got a nice drawing. Now that's the end of that bit.
That was the model we made.
Ah, Thamesmead.
It was a huge model. The planner suddenly produced this plan, which he had decided summed up all the discussions we'd had. He hadn't been asked to do it, he just produced it overnight, in the way I tended to produce things overnight. And it took off from there. As soon as you put something down on paper, it gives it a life of its own. And this plan, difficult to dispute it. Those drawings I did. The site was part of the Woolwich Arsenal.
Yes.
So it hadn't been developed at all. And it was covered with places where they stored explosives, and they had little moat. Each of the stores had a moat around it. So there was a great deal of water on the site around these moats.
Yes.
And it was really wonderful.
Yes.
When the GLC acquired Woolwich Arsenal site, then Thamesmead had already been developed south of the main road. And we saw, during that period, when they were building the first part of Thamesmead, we acquired the Woolwich Arsenal site. And then the powers that be, which was primarily in that case the deputy architect Jack Whittle, he decided it needed a new team. I got involved in that as the housing representative, and there were some planners, a chap called Hackett and his deputy. Norman Engelbach was put in from civic design. Well, he was a very good man, good choice, I think, but totally unlike the other people. He was erratic. He'd sit there doing very little for a long time, probably thinking, and then he'd suddenly say, "We're going to do this." To do a master plan is totally different from doing an individual building. I mean, it involves so many skills. And if the people don't altogether gel, I mean, most of us did. It was a big team, actually. Not just the four of us. Would be surprising if there weren't disagreements. The awful thing was that a decision was made by Jack Whittle that he wanted the town centre to be on the river. Now, it's very difficult to develop a town centre when you haven't got the housing round it.
Well, for the infrastructure too, isn't it? The roads
Indeed,
and the railway.
the whole thing.
They don't want to be
You
by
see,
the river, do they? They
no.
want to be further.
So the whole master plan got developed round putting the town centre there. I think it was always an error. The centre was going to be in between the existing development and the new one, connecting the two. It seemed an extraordinarily sensible decision. But as the deputy architect had said it must be on the river, we had to base the whole master plan round putting the centre there. And that was disastrous in my view. But what can one do? You get one rather strange decision, rather arbitrary, you know, and without research or anything, without consulting the existing planners, and in the end the whole town developed around that. Because in this business of the town centre, I think, never really going to work. But it hasn't done. The awful thing is about doing mass housing is you live with it forever. I mean, there's no day passes that I don't worry about what I did. I mean, it's a huge burden.